Riparian areas are a vital component of the ecosystem, and they are being degraded. Riparian zones can be described as the areas right in between a river and land. These areas have abundant vegetation and vary in size. Juliet Stromberg, a professor who studies riparian and wetland ecosystems at the School of Life Sciences at ASU, says life in the desert is found along the rivers in these riparian areas. Some estimates suggest that roughly 90% of life in the desert can be found within 1 mile of riparian zones. Not only are these areas worthy of preservation for the habitat they provide, they're also beneficial when flooding events occur. Professor Thomas Maddock, who teaches for the Department of Hydrology and Water Resources at the U of A, says,
"A healthy riparian system will prevent dangerous flooding that could occur, flash flooding in particular, because of the fact that the tree systems and the grasses and all reduce the energy levels of the water as it moves through the system."
Not to mention their intrinsic beauty offers a beautiful place for recreation. Historically, these rivers have been degraded, but not to the extent that we see today. Archaeologists claim that the Hohokam people lived in the valley for millennia and maintained their agricultural society along the Salt River until 1450 AD. Curator of Anthropology at the Arizona Museum of Natural History, Jerry Howard, says that conservative estimates suggest that 50,000 to 80,000 people relied on an irrigation system for subsistence at the peak of their society. Shane Anton, who is a manager at the Cultural Resources Department for the Salt River Pima Maricopa Indian community, claims that the term Hohokam is an appropriation for describing the ancestors of the Akimal and O'odham people.
We don't believe that there's a people, a group, a tribe that's called the Hohokam. For us, it's just our ancestors, the ones that are gone, and we describe them as Hohokam. And trying to explain that to the early ethnographers, they kind of got it mixed up.
One thing both the tribe and the archaeologists can agree on is that the strain the Hohokam put on the hydrologic system is potentially why there are no records of their society after 1450 AD.
Issues that we see in the collapse are overpopulation, using too much water, and trying to feed too many people, and also floods.
Archaeologists believe that by 1000 AD, the society was pulling nearly all of the water out of the river. Although the Hohokam may have caused some degradation of riparian areas, they left the soils nutrient-rich and water was still capable of returning to the region. In today's situation, both surface and groundwater are being depleted at exponential rates that have never before been seen. Professor Stromberg said the Salt River was previously 2 to 3 miles wide, and now it's merely 200 to 300 meters wide. The river's reduction in size can be attributed to the encroachment of development around it. Professor Maddock says,
"Most of the time, the water supply is not surface water, it's groundwater. And the groundwater pumping, of course, intersects the stream system and essentially captures water from the stream."
Riparian areas cannot reproduce themselves in these situations because the water table has dropped significantly beyond the reach of seedlings. About 80% to 90% of riparian areas were degraded in the mid-20th century, and this situation is only worsening.
Right now, for example, they want to build 6,500 homes or so along the San Pedro River, which would basically destroy the river. I mean, the amount of groundwater pumping that would have to occur far exceeds the amount of water that's ever in the river.
The more pumping that occurs, the quicker they will be deprived. This is a concern because we are increasingly dependent on groundwater since we are already living beyond our bioregional means. The Central Arizona Project allows us to pump the shrinking supply of Colorado River water uphill to Arizona residents. Some effective restoration is taking place at Tres Rios wetlands at the valley's biggest wastewater treatment plant. Dan Childers, who is a professor at the School of Sustainability at ASU and studies this wetland, explains.
The two components are, first of all, this large wastewater treatment wetland that was built to polish the water. That's the system that my lab group and I do most of our work in. And then the water that leaves that actually then goes through about a 3-mile long riparian restoration.
He says the wetland has done a great job at making the wastewater potable, but it could be even more effective.
If it had been designed differently, it could be even more efficient. And so what I would like to see is a situation where there's this interdisciplinary, even transdisciplinary group of people at the very beginning of the process who are working on making sure that the design is not just an engineered design, but it's an ecological design as well.
A group of researchers who study the sustainability of semi-arid hydrology and riparian areas has generated massive amounts of data, but only a small percentage have been put into action. There's still some research that needs to be done, but none of that will help if drastic measures aren't taken. Both Maddock and Stromberg agree that for truly successful restoration, there needs to be a reestablishment of natural processes like flowing water with occasional flooding in combination with a shallow water table. It's hard to imagine any of these things happening without significant societal changes. For over a century, most politicians have ignored our hydrologic reality by promoting unsustainable growth, but now the effects are more severe and will only get worse at this rate. This has been going on since the 1800s, when John Wesley Powell suggested that the western states should be divided according to their watersheds because of the lack of water in the arid west. Elitists concerned about economic growth laughed at this suggestion at our despair. Now we are left to grapple with these complexities. With only 2% of the water on Earth being freshwater and 1.6% of freshwater in the polar ice caps and glaciers, we are left with less than 1% for human consumption and a growing world population. What we know is that more pumping will lead to more degradation and a faster arrival into a dismal situation. What many people feel is that this is a situation that cannot be undone, partly because of how pervasive complacency is. We must restore feelings of faith in our humanity and in the collective actions of people, then mediate what we know with how we feel.